Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin our presentation. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Interaction of Processes and its Importance to a Successful Audit webinar. My name is Joseph Krolikowski and I am the QMS Program Manager for Perry Johnson Registrars. Couple of notes for everyone. All participants are on mute, but we absolutely want to address your questions, so please utilize the question portion of the dashboard. We will take your questions at the conclusion of the presentation. One of the more common questions that we get is, will this webinar be available for reviewing or for download? The answer to both questions is yes. Copies of the slides will be available for download shortly after we're finished. And this webinar and all other past PGR webinars can be reviewed by clicking through our website on the link Previously Recorded Webinars. Our topics for today, we're going to give a little bit of background on why this is such an important requirement. We're going to review where this requirement is rooted, both in ISO 9001-2008 and in ISO 9001-2015. We're going to have a little bit of discussion on what is and what is not a process. And then we have some strategies to share with you on meeting this requirement, hopefully with minimal change to your existing documentation. Going back to 2014, PJR was given a mandate. We were told by our accreditation bodies that we needed to start taking a harder line in our assessment of client interaction of process, or IOP documents. Now this was rooted primarily in a requirement from ISO 17021. Now that is of course the standard that PJR is held accountable to as an accredited certification body. Now that standard has a clause that reads in part, an audit program for the full certification cycle shall be developed to clearly identify the audit activities required to demonstrate that the client's management system fulfills the requirements for certification. Now it's that phrase, the client's management system, that was really emphasized. We are expected that our auditors perform and document the audits in such a way that it reflects the client's management system. Now where that gets difficult is if we have an interaction of processes document that doesn't do an effective job of identifying the processes. Our policy, our mandated policy, is that we have to adhere to the interaction of processes and only the interaction of processes in the preparation of the contents of the audit package. So because of this, we have instructed our auditors to issue nonconformances in situations where the interaction of processes is not effectively put together in such a way that it reflects what your core activities are, core and potentially support as well. So looking at the standard in terms of where this is an established requirement, we begin, of course, with ISO 9001-2008, and therein we have a couple of clauses that are in Section 4. We begin with 4.1a, where it states that the organization shall determine the processes that are needed for the quality management system and their application throughout the organization. That then continues in subclause B, where it states that the organization shall determine the sequence and interaction of those processes. Now, the 2008 version of the standard went on in Section 422 to mandate that the organization establish and maintain a quality manual that includes a description of the interaction between the processes of the quality management system. That particular verbiage, of course, no longer appears in the new version of ISO 9001. So let's turn our attention then to ISO 9001:2015. And again, we have three key requirements in play. The first two are virtual reproductions of what we had in the 2008 standard. This time they're found in 4.4.1 and 4.4.1b. As you can see, the wording is almost exactly the same. Where we have an additional requirement is in section 442. Where it states the organization shall maintain documented information to support the operation of its processes. Now, there are a few things that are considered in play based on that clause, and one of the items that is considered in play is the interaction of processes requirement. This is the clause that we point to. Now, in terms of what is a process, it's important that we understand the manner in which process is defined. Now, there is a standard. It's ISO 9000. It was also published in 2015, the same day that ISO 9001:2015 was published. That standard is a set of fundamentals, and it also includes all of the official definitions. And here's the official definition for process. It is a set of interrelated or interacting activities that use inputs to deliver an intended result. Now, the key aspect of this is the interrelated or interacting activities. That's a very, very key part of this definition. It establishes what a process is not. A process is not a single step. It's a series of activities that are focused on a shared goal or a set of shared goals. So what do we typically mean when we say a process? Well, here are some common process designations. A lot of our clients have what they refer to as a sales process, a purchasing process, production or manufacturing, shipping, design and development. Now, bear in mind, of course, your interaction of processes must reflect what you think your processes are, what you have established as the processes of your quality management system. If your understanding is that your quality management system is made up of 4 processes, such as sales, purchasing, production, support, it is completely acceptable for the IOP to reflect as much. So in other words, it can be a very simple rendering and still do an effective job of identifying what your processes are. Now, in terms of what is not a process, again, we do still see these from time to time where we have issues with kind of clarifying what makes up a process. So the items that get rejected the most often are going to fall into a couple of categories. IOPs that identify single steps and present those steps as processes. So for example, if we are given something that says create a work order, issue a production schedule, complete the work order, package the product, ship the product, and all 5 of these are identified as individual standalone processes, that's going to be potentially problematic. Because we're going to question, are these truly 5 distinct processes, or are these steps within a single process? And the most likely answer is going to be no, these are not individual processes. These are portions of a larger process. Another issue that comes up from time to time is we will be given an IOP that presents sections from the standard as processes. So, for example, we have an organization that turns over an IOP, and there's a process called resource management. Well, resource management is a section of the standard. Are you quite sure that that's a process within your organization? If we have a interaction of processes that reflects these kinds of issues, we have instructed our auditors, as I've mentioned, to issue a nonconformance and to try to drive the organization to improve their IOP and make it a more accurate reflection of what they do. Now, we recognize that for a lot of our clients, a lot of careful thought and consideration went into the development of the IOP. And we are also very well aware that for many of you, it is disconcerting to be told that something that passed audit assessment year over year is now suddenly unacceptable. We know that is jarring in an audit situation. So for many of you, we feel that a few tweaks are really all that is going to be needed to meet the requirement in a more effective way. So what I'd like to do over the next couple of slides, I'd like to review a sample of an interaction of processes and demonstrate for you two key ways that it can be improved to meet the requirements that we've established and also still be reflective of the organization's original vision. Now, this example that we're going to be looking at, it is not reflective of any particular PJR client. It was created solely for the purpose of this presentation. So here is our raw interaction of processes. Now, you will note that there are a total of 12 steps on here and 2 decision diamonds. And again, you know, we look at this and we say, well, okay, does this mean that the organization has 12 processes? So we look at something like assembly. Okay, it's possible that assembly is a standalone process. But then we look at something like order entered into mainframe system. Is that really a standalone process? Is that really a distinct activity with inputs and outputs and a defined goal and things of this nature? So our first improvement that we're going to do is we're going to identify what are the support activities. Now, you may have noticed when we were looking at the raw IOP that it was more a representation of the core activity. We didn't have any support processes. And what do we mean by support processes? We have things like management review, internal audit, training, those things that happen in the background and support the system at large. Now, it's important to note that neither ISO 9000 nor ISO 9001, they don't draw any particular distinction between classification of processes. We do see key or core processes as a common feature that's called out on IOPs, but nevertheless, support activities are definitely part of the quality management system. So let's apply that first improvement to our IOP. Okay. Now you'll note in the lower right-hand corner, we have added a disconnected box and it says support processes, and it identifies a variety of activities that support the system at large. So now we have a call out for this particular set of activities. We've kind of lumped them together, and that's acceptable to do. Now, the other step that we're going to take is we're going to create an IOP key. Now, this is a popular strategy that we've seen, again, where the idea is that we don't want to modify the original IOP. We want to retain the work that was done. But at the same time, we want to be sure that we've identified what the actual processes are. So a key could be numbering, it could be alpha characters. We are actually going to use color coding for our process here. So let's take a look at what that looks like here. Okay, so by virtue of the color key, we now know that there are 6 processes at play in this quality management system. We have sales order entry in orange, we have purchasing in green, we have production in yellow, shipping is purple, and that happens to be a single step. Quality is identified as a distinct process, and that's in red. And then support, our other standalone activity, is in blue. So now we've got something that can support the audit and it reflects what the processes are, and it also reflects support processes. This is ready for audit assessment. Now, it's important also that we acknowledge that there's a lot of ways to go about doing this. We have seen a lot of different approaches to identifying what the processes are and how they interact with each other. So we'd like to share some additional examples with you to give you some ideas on meeting this requirement, some different strategies. All of these are from actual PJR clients, and in all cases, permission was granted before they were utilized in the presentation. Okay, our first example here, we have a fairly simple singular flow starting with a contract process and wrapping up with a shipping process. 7 processes in total. And again, our support activities, and this time they've listed more of them, are kind of off to the side supporting the overall flow in general. And you'll note a couple of these process names are a little bit unique: final quality check process and so forth. This particular IOP is very unique, and the first thing I'd like for you to notice are the process names that are used here. Overhaul, very unique process name. Inventory management, again, a distinct process name. And off to the side, we have a management-related process. Clearly, this is their intent that this is going to be the support processes. And you'll also note the cross linkages. You'll note that quote interfaces with work order, receiving, inspection, and overhaul, but really no other activities. So that's kind of the key takeaway from how these interactions have been mapped out. Here is another strategy. This particular strategy is often referred to as swim lane. In this instance, we have 4 core processes. They're all identified in the left-hand side here. We have sales, purchasing, production, and support. Now, the takeaway from this is that sales and purchasing start independent of each other. Sales begins with a receipt of order from customers, and purchasing begins with inventory review. So the idea here, the intent is that there is obviously a relationship between these processes, but they don't trigger. One does not necessarily trigger the other. They kind of meet up on the right here with the step issuance of work orders. That's dependent on receipt of purchased items. And then both of these processes then flow down and trigger the production process. And in this case, we have 4 distinct sub-steps within production: injection molding, trimming, inspection, and shipping. And then again, as we've seen in other models, support is kind of a general support for the system at large. And in this case, they've identified 6 support activities. Here is another model. This time what they've opted to do is to highlight the core processes, and there are 5 of them in this instance, and then they've told us to presume that all other processes are support. So in this case, we have 5 core, and then everything else can be thought of as kind of lumped together under the heading support. And again, you'll note the unique process names that are used here: distribution, service exchange. These are not processes that reflect sections of the standard or anything like this. These are definitely distinct and related to the organization that created this IOP. So in conclusion, we want to ensure that we are providing our clients with a value-added audit and meeting all applicable requirements. We do hope that the points of this presentation are going to help you have an even better understanding of what your processes are, and be that much better prepared for audit assessment. I do thank you for your time and attention. I'm going to go ahead and unlock the question portion of the dashboard. Okay, we have several questions here from Lila Paris. Okay. Is it necessary to have the IOP in graphic form, or can it be in text form? It can be a text-based presentation. It would have to effectively show what the processes are and how they interface with each other, but it does not have to be a map. What is the difference between ISO 9000 2015 and ISO 9001 2015 in regards to IOP? Well, remember that ISO 9000 is the fundamentals and vocabulary document, and the 9000 standard includes a definition for the term process. The requirement for defining the interface of processes is found in ISO 9001. Is the IOP just pertaining to the QMS within the company? There are requirements for defining process interaction in the other standards. This presentation is rooted primarily for our clients that relate to ISO 9001. For more sector-specific standard requirements, I would request that you direct those questions to your auditor. Is the purpose of the IOP just to provide a map of the QMS? Not so much. It's intended to define what are the processes and how do they interact with each other. Is a step a process? Shipping, is this a step? It is, to the extent that a shipping process can be defined as an encompassing process with inputs and outputs. It depends on how the organization has defined it. Okay. Lila, I think your other questions we will have to discuss offline. You can contact me here at PJR headquarters. Donna Sakaran asks, can a collection of materials be considered as a process? Okay, so I think your question is, can a item called collection of materials be considered as a process? On the surface, I'm going to say possibly. I think that it could be. Again, it would depend on how it's been defined. As presented, I would say it's possible. David Bucarelli, how often should I have an internal audit done before 3 years is over? Well, David, I don't believe that entirely pertains to our presentation, but internal audit frequency is going to be defined internally. There is no official requirement for frequency of internal audits. Maria Plunkett, do I have an IOP sample from a government contractor? Maria, again, in terms of what an organization's processes are, that is going to be for the organization to define. I think it's important to remember that for all of these samples that we went over, the organization defined what are our processes. And again, we got to get past steps within a process. Issue a work order is not a process. We need to get this up to the process level. So I do not have a specific sample to share, but again, the idea here is be able to define what your processes are. Alana Ramos, can this be used for the AS 9100D standard? I'm going to say potentially. I would leave that as a matter to be discussed with your auditor and with the members of the AS 9100 Executive Committee. Okay, we had a follow-up question. Will the presentation be available? Yes, it'll be available right on our homepage. Look for the link previously recorded webinars. We had a follow-up question on first article inspection. Is it a process of sales quality or planning? Unfortunately, I cannot define that for you as to where that activity would go. That would be a matter perhaps to discuss with a consultant. Okay, Jerry Stanford is asking, does the IOP quality if it omits these requirements are omitted? Jerry, I apologize. I'm going to have to ask you to rephrase your question. I'm not understanding what you're asking. Donna Sakaran asking for some clarification. I would direct that if you are still seeking clarification on the interaction of processes for your organization, it may be best for you to work with a consultant. The examples that we've provided are going to be available for download shortly after we're finished. And Mr. Stanford, still looking to see if you've got a possible rewording of your question. I'd like to help you if I can. Okay, Mr. Stanford, I'm going to request that you contact us here at PGR headquarters. We'll see if we can address your question offline. Thank you all for your time. Have a good day.